My name is Jonathan Clark. I'm 38 years old. I'm a father, a teacher, and, up until a few years ago, someone who still believed that family, no matter how difficult, would never cross certain lines. I wasn't naive. I knew we had our issues. My parents had always been quietly critical. My brother Eric and I were never close. Not since we were teenagers. Still, I believed that at the end of the day, they'd have my back, that they'd never do anything to hurt my daughter Lily, and I held on to that belief, right up until the moment I returned to an empty campsite. No cars, no tents, just a folded note weighted with a rock. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. The camping trip was their idea. My mother called me out of the blue one afternoon, sounding warmer than usual. "Before you leave for Oregon, we should all spend some time together. Make a memory for Lily," she said. At the time, I was skeptical. We weren't exactly a family that made memories, but Lily, my 9-year-old, lit up at the idea. "Can we go, Dad? I want to see the stars without city lights." And I said yes, because I wanted to give her that. And maybe, deep down, I hoped for some kind of peace offering. One last chance to believe that they could let me go with grace. We were leaving Pennsylvania in 2 weeks. I'd accepted a new teaching job in a small Oregon town. Slower pace, cleaner air, a better life for Lily. After the divorce 2 years ago, I'd done everything to build something solid for her and for myself. My ex-wife left us for someone wealthier, someone more ambitious. I didn't beg. I just got to work. My daughter became my center of gravity, and every decision since had been made with her future in mind. Oregon was supposed to be our reset. I never thought my family would turn it into something else entirely. We arrived at the campsite on a Friday afternoon. It was remote, far off the main road, down a winding gravel path, deep in Millstone Valley State Forest. No cell reception, no ranger in sight, just pine trees, cold air, and an eerie kind of silence. Eric had already arrived with his wife and son. The tents were mostly set up. My father was chopping wood. My mother sat by the fire pit with a thermos. It looked picture perfect. Lily ran straight to her cousin Jake, and I foolishly let my guard down. The first evening passed without incident. We roasted hot dogs, toasted marshmallows, and shared stories. They asked about Oregon, about the school I'd be working at, about whether Lily was ready to leave her real family behind. I brushed it off, thinking it was just their usual passive aggression. My mother offered wine. My father handed me a plate of food like it was communion. There were glances between them, between Eric and my dad, that didn't sit right with me. But I didn't say anything. I'd spent years swallowing their subtle manipulations. Why would this be any different? The next morning, my father suggested a short hike. "There's a beautiful overlook about a mile up the trail," he said. "Lily will love it." Eric added, "Trail's well marked, no way to get lost." My mother packed a small backpack with water, a protein bar and a compass, just in case, she said, her eyes avoiding mine. It felt strange, but Lily was already tugging my hand. "Please, Dad, let's go." So we did. We walked up that quiet trail through tall pines, thinking we'd be back in time for lunch. We weren't gone more than 2 hours, but when we returned, the entire world had changed. The moment we stepped back into the clearing, something felt wrong. The air was still, too still, as if even the birds had quieted. I looked toward where the tents had been, where the campfire should have still been smoldering, but there was nothing, no tents, no firewood, no coolers, no people, just the flattened grass, where our lives had been only hours earlier. My first thought wasn't betrayal, it was confusion. Had they moved? Were we in the wrong place? But then I saw it, the familiar log, where Lily had sat roasting marshmallows, and the stone fire pit we'd used the night before. This was our campsite. Only now, It was empty. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain. "Where did everybody go?" She clutched the backpack we'd taken on the hike, her small fingers curling around the strap. I scanned the area, my heart pounding, unwilling to believe what was clearly in front of me. I moved slowly, cautiously, stepping toward a tree stump near the center of the clearing. That's where I saw it, a plastic container and a single folded piece of paper held down by a rock. The handwriting on the note was unmistakable. It was my father's, bold, mechanical, precise. I unfolded it with shaking hands. The message read, "This is for your own good. Trust me." I stared at the words, willing them to make sense. My mind refused to accept the truth. For your own good. Trust me? What could that possibly mean? I looked inside the plastic container, a basic tent, 2 bottles of water, a flashlight, a tiny first aid kit, some granola bars, a lighter enough for a short hike. Not survival. My stomach turned. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My family, my own blood, had left us here, alone, in the middle of the forest. No phones, no vehicles, no explanation. Nothing but that note and the mocking suggestion that this was somehow good for us. I turned to Lily, who was watching me intently, trying to understand from my expression what was happening. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "Are they coming back?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect her from the weight of this realization. But I couldn't. Not anymore. "I don't know," I said, kneeling to meet her eye level. "But we're not going to panic. We're going to be smart. We're going to stay calm. And we're going to take care of each other. Okay?" She nodded slowly, blinking back tears. And in that moment, I knew she was depending on me more than ever now. We set up the emergency tent together. It was smaller than the one we'd used the night before, clearly not meant for long-term use. As I worked to stake it down, my thoughts spun in every direction. Why had they done this? What kind of twisted logic told them this was for our own good? I remembered the way my mother looked at Lily when she kissed her forehead before we left for the hike. The way Eric had handed me the compass, almost like a parting gift. They knew. They planned this. It wasn't spontaneous. This was deliberate. That night, as we lay inside the thin shelter, I didn't sleep. I stared at the nylon ceiling above us while Lily curled beside me, her breathing shallow. I kept listening for footsteps, headlights, any sign that this was some horrific test and they'd be back. But no one came, just the wind through the trees and the distant, echoing howl of something wild. That was when the truth finally settled in my bones. They had left us, intentionally, and we were going to have to save ourselves, because no one else was coming. Morning light filtered through the tent, pale and cold. I hadn't slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind stayed alert all night, scanning every sound, every shift of wind in the branches, every imagined footstep that never came. Lily was still asleep beside me, her small body curled tightly around the stuffed rabbit she insisted on bringing everywhere. For a moment I just watched her, her chest rising and falling steadily, her innocence still intact, and I made a silent promise. They would not break her. Whatever this was, whatever lesson they thought they were teaching, it would not be at her expense. I stepped outside, stretching limbs stiff from tension and cold. The morning air bit at my skin, sharper now that the shock was fading and reality was sinking in. I returned to the plastic box they had left behind and spread everything out on a flat rock. Minimal food, 2 bottles of water, a flashlight, 1 set of spare batteries, a flimsy tent and a lighter. It was insultingly calculated, just enough to claim we weren't completely abandoned, not enough to survive. My father had always been a man of appearances. He wouldn't have risked outright charges, but he'd come close. As I knelt beside the fire pit from the night before, I found some leftover charred wood and ash. Enough to spark something, if I used it right. I gathered what dry twigs I could find, arranged them carefully, and flicked the lighter. It took 4 tries. My hands were trembling too much to control it. But eventually the flame caught. I fed it slowly, carefully, watching the embers build into something steady. It felt like the first true act of defiance, lighting a fire where they hoped I'd freeze, rebuilding if only slightly what they had tried to burn down. While the fire grew, I let my mind drift back. This wasn't sudden. Not really. There had always been signs. I remembered being 17 and wanting to study writing instead of business. My father hadn't yelled. He'd simply said, "Don't expect me to pay for college if you're going to throw your life away." I remembered the subtle digs at Lily's drawings. She's creative, but maybe steer her towards something practical. I remembered the silence after my divorce. The way my mother had said, "Well, some things are bound to fall apart when you try too hard to be your own man." They had never wanted me to stand on my own, only on their terms. As long as I stayed within their expectations, they played the part of a loving family. But the moment I made a decision they didn't approve of, especially one that took Lily away, the mask slipped. What scared them wasn't losing me. It was losing control over me. And this camping trip, it wasn't a farewell. It was punishment, a psychological ambush dressed as a family outing. And I'd walked right into it, carrying my daughter beside me. Back inside the tent, Lily was stirring. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes and looking around. "Did they come back yet?" she asked. I shook my head gently. "No, not yet." She was quiet for a long moment. "Are we going to be okay?" I reached out, brushing her hair from her face. "We're going to be more than okay," I said. "We're going to outsmart them, just like you outsmarted those math problems last week." She smiled faintly, and in that moment, I began mentally constructing the steps of our survival, not with panic, but with purpose. I didn't tell Lily everything. Not yet. She didn't need to carry the weight of adult betrayal on top of everything else. But I told her enough, that we'd been left, that it might be a while before anyone came back, and that we needed to survive together. She nodded, solemn and steady. That's who Lily was. She had a quiet strength, one I hadn't always appreciated in the comfort of routine. Now, in the middle of nowhere, that strength became our lifeline. We sat by the fire together and made a plan. Step 1. Water. I remembered a small stream we passed near the trail the day before. With the compass Eric had handed me, the only generous thing he'd done, though now it felt like a cruel mockery. We retraced our steps, tying strips of my t-shirt to branches as trail markers. Lily held the compass while I supported her with my good ankle. The stream was still there, running over smooth rocks, crisp and clear. I crouched to taste it, and while I couldn't guarantee it was safe without purification, we didn't have another option. I told Lily we'd boil it as best we could. We filled both our bottles and returned to the fire. Using the little pot from the container, I placed the water over the flames, waiting. It was slow, but it worked. Every small victory felt enormous. I watched Lily sketch in the dirt with a stick, drawing what looked like a map of our camp. "If we go back that way," she said, pointing west, "we might find the road." She remembered more than I expected. I pulled out the compass again and tried to estimate our direction based on the sun. My gut told me the road was east, not west, but I didn't say anything yet. The real problem was this. We didn't know how far we were from the main entrance. We'd driven for nearly an hour on dirt roads before we reached the campsite. My father had handled the driving. Another layer of control. They'd wanted to make sure I couldn't leave easily, even if I tried, but I remembered something he said, almost in passing, about a ranger station near the main trail. If I could just figure out which direction that was, and if it wasn't too far, we might make it out before our supplies ran out, or before something worse found us. We spent the afternoon collecting berries near the stream, reinforcing our tent with fallen branches, and trying unsuccessfully to build a better signal fire. The smoke never rose far enough. Not in this wind. As night began to fall, Lily asked, "What happens if we can't find the ranger place?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, at the way her hair was tangled, at the scrape on her cheek she hadn't complained about. "Then we make one more plan," I said, "and then another, and another after that. Because we don't stop, that's our rule." That night, curled beside Lily inside the thin walls of our tent, I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I thought, I listened. I prepared. My ankle still ached, but it held weight. We had water, a little food, and a compass. It wasn't much, but it was more than despair. My family had underestimated me. They thought they could strand us here, break me, force me to crawl back. They didn't understand what they'd awakened. And when I got out of here, when Lily and I walked out of these woods alive, I wouldn't just survive, I would expose them. The fifth morning arrived colder than the rest. Lily's face was pale, and her voice when she spoke was thin and dry. "My head hurts, Dad," she whispered. Her forehead was warm, too warm. I knew that fever. I'd seen it before. Whether it was from the water, the stress, or something else, she was getting sick, and we were running out of time. I gave her a small sip from our boiled supply, wrapped her in both our jackets, and told her to rest. Then I stood outside the tent, staring into the tree line, feeling something shift in me. This was no longer about escaping. This was war. I checked the stream trap again. Nothing. No fish. No signs of food. Just the endless rush of water over stone, mocking me with its indifference. When I returned to camp, I noticed prints in the mud near the edge of the clearing, large ones, heavy, not human. My breath caught. I crouched to examine them. Ear, fresh. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned slowly, scanning the woods. Nothing, no movement. But the tracks told the story. Something large had passed near us in the night, close enough to smell our fire, to smell my daughter. I didn't tell Lily. She was already sweating under the coats. Her cheeks flushed. I crushed more berries into a cloth, straining their juice into her mouth, a weak gesture of nourishment. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to say, "You're doing great, Dad." And then they closed again. That one sentence nearly undid me. I sat beside her, holding her hand, and forced myself to breathe. 1, 2, 3. I couldn't fall apart now. I could feel something deep in my chest, like a dam starting to crack. I wasn't scared of the forest. I was scared of being too late. I needed a signal. Something bigger than the fire we'd built before. I piled green leaves, moss, damp bark, anything that would smoke onto the fire. It sputtered, then billowed out thick grey clouds. It choked me, but I welcomed it. I fed the fire every 5 minutes, watching the smoke coil up above the trees. "Please," I whispered, "please let someone see this." My voice was barely audible above the crackle of flame. I wasn't praying to anyone in particular, just reaching out into the void, hoping something or someone would answer. By late afternoon, Lily began muttering in her sleep, delirious. I knelt over her, soaked a cloth in cool water, and pressed it to her forehead. She flinched, then relaxed again. "Mom," she whispered, her voice paper-thin. "Are you coming?" My stomach turned. "I'm here," I said, brushing her hair back. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as I said it, I heard rustling in the trees, louder this time. Not wind, not birds. Heavy, deliberate. I turned, heart pounding, and saw it, a black bear stepping cautiously into the clearing, nose twitching. I froze. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. 20 feet away, the bear stared back at me, massive and curious. My brain flooded with everything I'd read about bears. Don't run, don't turn, make yourself big. But I couldn't move. Couldn't risk making a sound with Lily just feet behind me. I raised my arms slowly, backing away from the tent. The bear sniffed, then moved toward our fire, toward our things. My hands trembled, but my voice remained steady. "Lily," I whispered, barely audible. "Wake up. We're going to climb a tree now." Climbing that tree with a feverish child on my back and a throbbing ankle was the most brutal thing I've ever done. But fear is a powerful fuel. I hoisted Lily up to the first branch, whispered instructions she barely processed, and shoved her higher. Her limbs moved on instinct. I followed, biting back the pain, my arms trembling as I pulled myself up beside her. We sat on a wide branch, about 15 feet off the ground, hidden behind a veil of leaves. Below us, the bear sniffed around our fire, then tore open what little was left of our supplies. It was calm, curious, but far too close. We didn't move for an hour, maybe longer. The sun began to set behind the trees, painting the sky in pale orange and bruised purple. The bear eventually wandered off, disinterested in plastic and ashes. But by then, Lily had fallen into a feverish sleep in my arms. I tied her to the branch with my belt to keep her from slipping. My hands were shaking so badly I had to do it twice. I remember thinking, if I die here, it will be in silence. But I won't go without trying everything first. I stayed awake the entire night, listening to the forest breathe and watching the darkness swallow the world below us. By morning, Lily stirred. Her eyes looked clearer. Her temperature had dropped slightly. "Is it gone?" she asked. "It's gone," I said. "We're going to get out of here." She nodded, too weak to smile. My ankle felt like it had been crushed in a vice, but it held my weight. I helped her down the tree, one branch at a time, then wrapped the remains of our tent around her shoulders. Our camp was destroyed. The bear had torn through everything, the fire pit, the backpacks, even the water bottles. It was like nature itself had joined the assault. But we were still alive, and that meant we still had a chance. I fashioned a sling from the tent fabric and began dragging Lily through the woods. Every step felt like fire in my leg. But I didn't stop. I remembered something my father said offhandedly on the drive-in, something about a ranger station near the main trail. At the time, I barely registered it, but now it echoed in my mind like a compass of its own. Just find the main trail, find the station, find help. I checked the compass. We turned east, the direction I believed the entrance had been. With each slow step, I whispered to Lily, "We're getting closer." For hours we moved in silence, stopping only for me to rest my leg or give her sips of water from what I'd managed to salvage. Her voice grew stronger. At one point she sat up on the sling and whispered, "You're like one of those survival dads on YouTube." I laughed, dry, tired, but real. That moment carried me through the next 2 miles. When we finally saw a marker, a wooden post with faded red paint, I nearly collapsed. It was a trail, a real one, maintained, blazed. "We're not lost anymore," I thought. "We found it," I said aloud, almost in disbelief. Then, voices. Human voices, faint but real. My heart leapt into my throat. I called out, my voice hoarse from smoke and thirst. "Hello, we need help." Silence. Then footsteps. 2 figures emerged from the bend, a man and a boy, both in hiking gear. The man's face shifted from curiosity to alarm as he took in Lily's condition and the sling. "What happened?" he asked, already reaching into his pack for water. "We were left out here," I said, my voice cracking. "By family." He stared at me in disbelief. "You're close to the ranger station. We'll take you there." You're safe now." The ranger station was a modest building tucked between the trees, its wooden walls sun-bleached and wind-worn. But it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The man who had found us, Marcus, and his son helped carry Lily inside while I hobbled behind them, my leg barely cooperating anymore. The ranger on duty, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Collins, didn't ask many questions at first. She saw our condition and acted fast. Lily was given electrolytes, blankets, and a cot. Patricia examined my ankle, gave me something for the pain, and then looked me dead in the eye and said, "Now, tell me everything." I started slow, cautious. At first, I was too ashamed to say the words out loud, that my own family had left us in the forest to teach me a lesson. But when she asked who else might be out there, I found myself speaking plainly. "No one's missing," I said. "They left us, on purpose." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, and I watched her face shift from professional concern to something colder. "That's not just wrong," she said. "That's a criminal offense, especially with a child involved." She picked up the radio and called the county sheriff before I could even process the gravity of her words. By the time paramedics arrived, Lily's fever had begun to break for real. She was talking again, asking if we were really safe. I told her yes, and meant it. At the hospital, they treated my ankle, a high-grade sprain, not a break, and diagnosed Lily with mild dehydration and a minor bacterial infection, likely from the stream water or exhaustion. The nurses were kind, the doctors professional, but I felt the judgment in their eyes when I explained how we'd ended up out there. It was incomprehensible to them. It was still incomprehensible to me, until I reminded myself this wasn't about wilderness. It was about control. Sheriff Donovan came to take my statement. A broad-shouldered man with grey stubble and a surprisingly gentle voice. He listened without interrupting, his pen moving silently over the page. When I showed him the note, "This is for your own good. Trust me," he narrowed his eyes. "They left you with no way to call for help? No ride? No backup plan?" I shook my head. "Just a flashlight, a lighter, and some granola bars." He exhaled hard. "I've been a sheriff 27 years. Never seen anything like this. We'll find them, and we'll press charges. Don't worry." It didn't take long. My brother, parents, and sister-in-law had all returned to the campsite on the exact day they said they would, 10 days after they left us. Maybe they expected to find me desperate. Maybe they wanted to be the saviors who rescued me just in time to reassert their authority. Instead, they were greeted by a team of deputies with a warrant and handcuffs. I wasn't there to see it, but the sheriff called me personally. "Your family's in custody, Jonathan. All of them, and the evidence is solid. We found emails, planning documents, Google searches about safe isolation periods. They thought this through. It wasn't an accident." I watched the arrest on the evening news from my hotel room. My father in handcuffs, jaw clenched with false dignity. My mother looking fragile and confused. Eric shouting at the camera, blaming me. The media ran with it. Father leaves son and granddaughter in forest to prevent cross-country move. Reporters tried to reach me for comment. I gave none. I didn't need to explain. The facts spoke louder than anything I could say. But inside, a storm was building. Not of revenge, but of clarity. For the first time in my life, I saw my family not as misguided people who meant well, but as dangerous ones who didn't know how to love. The district attorney's office arranged a no-contact order before I ever asked for one. But I agreed to one supervised conversation, not for their closure, but for mine. The meeting took place in a private room at the county jail. A sterile space, 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A pane of glass. I sat down first. My hands didn't shake. My voice was steady. I'd rehearsed everything I needed to say. What I didn't expect was how small they looked through the glass. My father's shoulders hunched. My mother's eyes rimmed red. My brother's smirk gone. They picked up the phone first. Eric tried to lead. "Jonathan," he began, "this got out of hand. We didn't think you'd be—" I cut him off. Sick, scared, trapped with a dying child and a bear in the woods. He blinked. "That was— You planned it. You all did. You packed the supplies. You drove us out. You lied to Lily." I turned to my mother. "You told her we were making memories. Then you disappeared." My father finally spoke. "You were throwing your life away, running off to God knows where with that child. That child is your granddaughter, and she got sick from the water we had to boil over a fire I built with a lighter. You left like a test. Do you know what it feels like to drag your child on a tarp through the woods, while she calls for a mother who abandoned her too?" He said nothing, just looked at the floor like he was ashamed, but not of the right things. I leaned in slightly, voice lower now. "You thought you'd break me, but you broke yourselves. You proved everything I feared was true. You don't love people, you try to control them. And when you can't, you punish them. I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here to tell you what happens next." I held their gaze one by one. "You'll serve your sentences. You'll never see Lily again. You'll never hear from me again. We're not your family anymore. We're survivors, and your absence will be the greatest gift you ever gave us." My mother began to cry quietly. My father sat like stone. Eric shook his head like I was the one who didn't understand, but I'd never seen more clearly in my life. I stood, placing the phone back in its cradle. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I simply walked away. The guard opened the door, and I didn't look back. I had nothing left to take from them. They had taken their shot and failed. When I returned to the hotel, Lily was waiting for me in a new pair of pajamas, sipping cocoa. She looked up and asked, "Did you talk to them?" I nodded. "Are they sorry?" I paused, then shook my head. "No, but that's not our problem anymore." She set down her mug. "Good. Can we start packing for Oregon?" I smiled for the first time in days. "We already have, kiddo. We already have." Our move to Oregon wasn't just a relocation. It was a resurrection. We didn't bring much with us. A few suitcases, Lily's drawings, a folder of court documents sealed with restraining orders. But what we carried inside us, that weighed more than anything else. In the first few weeks, I watched Lily flinch every time the wind rustled through the trees outside our window. At night, she sometimes woke gasping, clutching her blanket like it was the only thing anchoring her to safety, and I understood, because I did the same thing, just silently, in different ways. I enrolled her in a new school with small class sizes and kind teachers. I took a job at the local high school, teaching literature stories about survival, resilience, quiet rebellion, fitting, and we started therapy. Dr. Sarah Leland, our trauma counselor, specialized in family betrayal. She never asked us to forgive. She asked us to speak, to draw, to sit with what had happened without having to justify it. She gave Lily clay on the first visit and told her, "Shape what safety feels like." Lily molded a small rabbit curled beside a fire that broke me more than the forest ever had. We began to heal, not linearly, not gracefully, but intentionally. I learned to stop explaining away the red flags I'd once ignored. I stopped minimizing what they'd done. I began talking slowly with other survivors, and eventually I started writing. What began as scattered notes on a notepad became a manuscript, a book, Left to Die, a father and daughter's journey out of the wilderness. It wasn't about revenge. It was about warning others. It was about reclaiming the story they had tried to write for us, and telling our own instead. The response to the book surprised me. Letters poured in, emails, messages from people who had never been physically abandoned, but emotionally exiled by those who were supposed to love them. They told me, "This gave me language for what I've survived, and for the first time in my life, I realized my voice, the one they tried to silence, had power, so I used it. I gave talks, joined panels, started a foundation with Dr. Leland to support survivors of coercive family dynamics. And Lily, she blossomed. She spoke at her new school's assembly. Love doesn't trap you, she said. It frees you." A year after the incident, Lily came to me one morning with a strange request. "Can we go camping?" I blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "I want to remember what it feels like without being scared. I want to build the fire this time." So we went. Different forest, different tent. This time, she carried the compass. She found a flat space. She gathered the kindling. I let her light the flame, and when it caught, she looked at me and said, "See, we can make fire too. Not destroyers, not victims. Builders, survivors." That night, as we sat beneath a sky blanketed in stars, Lily asked, "Do you ever wonder what they're doing now?" I thought for a moment. "Not really," I said. "The chapter is closed." She nodded. "Yeah, I think we have better stories now." And she was right. We did, because we'd rewritten our story, not with vengeance, but with strength. And nothing, not even the deepest woods or the coldest betrayal, could take that away. Freedom didn't arrive with the court verdict or the restraining orders. It came slowly, in the quiet spaces of our new life. In the way Lily no longer jumped when a door closed too hard, in how I stopped checking over my shoulder every time I saw a car that looked like my father's. It came in Saturday mornings with pancakes and cartoons, without tension sitting in the air like smoke. It came in therapy breakthroughs, and in the silence that no longer meant danger. We didn't just escape the forest. We escaped the people who lived like one, cold, dense, and unforgiving. When I thought about legacy now, I didn't think about the Clark name or the lineage my father always bragged about. I thought about Lily, her laughter, her drawings, the way she stood up for a friend on the playground when a teacher wasn't watching. I thought about how she now said, "We've got this," whenever something went wrong. And I believed her. We did. Because we'd already survived the unimaginable, and not by chance, by choice. By refusing to let darkness define us, by lighting our own fire and walking out of it alive. My book reached the national stage. I was invited to speak at universities, shelters, even a juvenile facility where teens with stories far more violent than mine listened with heavy eyes. They asked the same question every time. "How did you forgive them?" And my answer never changed. I didn't. I just stopped letting them matter. Forgiveness, I learned, is a gift you give to yourself, but it's not always required, especially when the wound is carved by people who would do it again if they thought you'd stay quiet. 5 years after the wilderness, Lily and I hosted the first wilderness safety retreat through our foundation, a weekend of healing, of education, of laughter. Parents and children who'd survived things that had no name gathered around a controlled campfire and shared stories. And as Lily stood beside me, reading a poem she wrote called "The Fire We Built," I felt something loosen in my chest. Not pain, not pride, peace. The kind that comes only when you've faced death, of the body, of the spirit, and chosen life anyway. I'll never know what would have happened if that ranger hadn't been on duty, if Marcus hadn't heard our voices, if the fever had turned worse. I used to stay up at night reliving the what-ifs, but now I sleep because the future isn't built on what-ifs. It's built on what we decide from here forward. And I decided my daughter would grow up free, free from fear, free from coercion, free to walk her own path, without someone else's hand on the back of her neck. I would make sure of it. And she'd know what love really looked like. Not manipulation, not conditions, just presence. So to anyone listening who's ever been betrayed by the ones who were supposed to protect you, I leave you with this. You are not weak for walking away. You are not broken because they didn't love you right. You are powerful because you chose peace over proof, healing over holding on. Family is not blood. Family is fire. You get to choose which flames warm you and which ones you walk away from. And sometimes the greatest revenge is living well in a life they no longer have access to. Have you ever had to walk away from people who called themselves family, but treated you like property? Share your story in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive in silence and rebuild your own fire.